Now that we've got a whole new draft class for the 2024 NBA draft, I want to take a look back at the 2023 NBA draft. Not just the class, not just the players, but the draft itself and the impact that it's had on the NBA over the last year. And of course, there's only one real place to start here. It's with the first overall pick, but not just the fact that Victor Wembanyama has been awesome for San Antonio and he arguably exceeded expectations in his rookie season, but thinking back about how that impacted the season the year prior to the 2023 NBA draft. It's going to be a long time, if ever, for us to see another season that was as impacted by a potential first overall pick in a draft than the league was the year prior to Wembanyama being drafted. Teams were basically giving away players. They were aggressively trying to tank towards the bottom, and we might see something kind of similar with the 2025 class because of how good it looks, but to have a generational prospect like Wembanyama completely altered how the season looked the year before. It was some of the most egregious tanking we've ever seen, and ultimately San Antonio were the winners of the Tankathon sweepstakes. And maybe even more impressive than that, maybe even more impressive than the impact that Wembanyama had on the league before even getting there, was that he actually exceeded expectations as a rookie. I made videos on this channel, on other channels, talking about how maybe we should lower our expectations offensively for Victor Wembanyama. I felt like the defense was going to be there, his length, his activity level, his rim protection, all that stuff. But I was a little bit nervous about the offensive game. Not that it wasn't going to get there eventually, but like the concept that he was going to go out and average, 20 points a game or something as a rookie didn't seem realistic to me. And through the first couple of months, that's kind of how it looked. And then all of a sudden, San Antonio was like, hey, maybe we should try playing this guy at the 5, not alongside another big. And then all of a sudden, he starts making threes, getting to the rim. I would not be surprised if Victor Wembanyama ends up being a top 10 player in the NBA this upcoming season. I wouldn't be surprised if San Antonio wins 40 games, even in a loaded Western Conference, and challenges potentially for a play-in spot. I think that he is that good. They're going to continue to look to add pieces around him. There's really not much more you can say about Victor Wembanyama after an unbelievable rookie season. But when you think now about the 2023 draft, the night of the draft, at the time, this is really where things got interesting, and you kind of had to pick one side or the other. It was Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller for the second or the third pick. And at the time, I was a big Scoot Henderson guy. I felt like he was an NBA-ready player with high upside, could get to the rim, could finish at the rim, was going to improve as a shooter. I loved his competitiveness. I loved everything about Scoot Henderson, and I liked Brandon Miller, but I just felt like Scoot was more of a sure thing. I felt like in a draft class that didn't have Victor Wembanyama, Scoot would have been the first pick, and I would have been totally okay with it. In hindsight, again, it's only been one season. Brandon Miller was absolutely the correct selection here at number 2 overall for Charlotte. Arguably their franchise player, even above someone like LaMelo, although obviously that has a lot to do with injuries more than anything else. And after a weird summer league performance for Brandon Miller as a rookie, he figured it out partway through the year. And his multi-level scoring in the mid-range from 3, he's going to be a great two-way player as well if he continues to develop defensively. A 10 out of 10 A+ selection for Charlotte at number 2 with Brandon Miller. And again, I thought they should have picked Scoot. I thought they should have just picked him, played him alongside LaMelo, and figured it out later. But ultimately, Portland ends up with the 3rd overall pick. They jump up in the lottery and they end up with Scoot. And I strongly believe that one of the main reasons that Damian Lillard ended up leaving Portland, goes to Milwaukee, Drew Holiday ends up going to Boston, all of those dominoes happened because Portland ended up with the 3rd pick in the draft. I think they didn't expect to get that high up in the draft. They expected to get like the 7th pick, trade that away for someone to try and help Dame. That's why they re-signed Jeremy Grant. That's why they made all these other moves. Their expectation was Damian Lillard was going to be on the roster. And then once they moved up not only into the top 3 of this class, but also that Scoot fell to them at 3, a guy that a lot of people expected to go to, he falls to them at 3. I think that is the moment that Damian Lillard ultimately decided to go elsewhere because Portland wasn't going to trade the 3rd pick, the opportunity to take Scoot. And then all these other dominoes that ultimately lead to Boston winning the title happened because Scoot Henderson ends up a Portland Trailblazer. And all that stuff sounds super interesting until you look at the rookie season of Scoot Henderson. I really struggle to properly articulate how weird of a rookie year it was for Scoot. He had the weird eye injury thing, so he's wearing goggles, had a ton of injury issues throughout the year. He got hurt in Summer League, even though he looked really impressive in the beginning of it. And then basically the entire season just looked like a completely different player. He was coming off the bench. The confidence level wasn't there. He was making plays and making passes. Like, I don't have a lowlights package here behind me, but I'm sure I could put one together pretty easily. Like, there's just decision-making that was terrible. There are turnovers that aren't just your normal, oh man, I made the wrong decision. This guy made a nice defensive play. He's just throwing it straight to the defense. He's dribbling it off his foot. He's airballing threes. He's hitting nothing but glass with mid-range jumpers. And I'd be lying if I said I wasn't concerned about being on that side of the debate of saying that I was a scoop guy at the time. And like, he might end up being like actually a bust. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. It's only been one season, but he could come off the bench this year and just be like a bench guard for his career. That is probably the main guy that I'm paying attention to in terms of like, what are we looking at here? What's Scoot Henderson going to end up becoming when you consider all the dominoes that fell because he ends up going to Portland? But we knew at the time of the draft that those were the top 3 prospects. We knew that Wemby was going to go 1, and then in some order it was going to be Scoot, Brandon Miller 2, 3. After that in this draft is when you really started to have a ton of variance in terms of the opinions of where certain guys were going to go. And at 4 and 5, we of course have Amen and Asar Thompson going to Houston and Detroit respectively. I'm going to cover them both at the same time because I see them as kind of not similar players, but at similar levels, because Amen Thompson really started to play well towards the end of the season when Alperen Sengun got hurt, which was the case for most of the Houston Rockets players. Jalen Green started playing better. Jabari Smith started playing better, as did Ben Thompson. And part of the reason that both him and Jabari Smith started playing better is because they played up a position. He started playing more at the 4, maybe even some small ball 5 as well, because he can rebound the ball so well. Same thing with Jabari Smith, and that helped the spacing. And that is going to be a theme for both of the Thompson twins, is the floor spacing aspect of their game. If they can shoot the ball well from 3, the ceiling is immense. If they can't, they're probably going to end up playing more at the 3-4, maybe even some small ball 5 in a men's case, to mitigate these spacing issues. And that is going to be the thing that is going to cap their NBA ceiling, is if they can't shoot the ball well. Now, each of them showed some interesting passing instincts. Each of them could be incredibly good defensive players, but in terms of being real, legitimate, high-level offensive players, the jump shot has to come along for both of them, and they're both in interesting development situations moving forward as well, because I think Houston is going to try and be good here pretty soon, so he might, might get pushed out of the rotation, whereas Asar, they need spacing in Detroit. They've already got Jaden Ivey and Cade, who isn't like a top-tier shooter at this point in his career. They just brought in Ron Holland, who isn't exactly a floor spacer either, and so Asar Thompson could end up getting pushed out of the rotation there a little bit in Detroit as well. 2 guys that I think could be awesome for this class and really catapult where this class looks historically in a handful of years, or maybe be a little bit forgettable depending on how the jump shooting develops. Speaking of needing to develop a jump shot, Anthony Black at number 6 is someone that I would be surprised if he's on a different team in 6 months or in a year. The Magic are really good, and they are not going to just play someone in Anthony Black because he was the 6th pick in the draft. They're not just going to play Jett Howard, who we're going to talk about later, because he was the 11th pick in the draft. I think Jett Howard actually has a better chance of playing this year than Anthony Black does, because he can actually space the floor, look good in Summer League. The perimeter jump shooting just has not developed for Anthony Black, and he's like a point forward, but he's just not particularly good. Like, he's got good size. He was billed as this point guard coming in, and ironically, Orlando really needs a point guard, but if you're not going to space around their main guys, he's not going to play a ton. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he's part of a package for somebody to try and help Orlando win in more of a win-now mode. Maybe he ends up being good down the road, but I'm definitely a little bit down on Anthony Black. Someone that I really like, though, 7th overall, Bilal Coulibaly, someone that I think is pretty forgotten within this class. There's some more interesting, some more exciting names as we get towards, in the teens and at the 20th pick. I really, really like him. He's still incredibly young. When you think about where he was playing at, the level of basketball he was playing at 2 years ago compared to where he is now, not only for Washington, but for the France national team as well, I think he's going to be really good. There's still some, obviously, shot creation stuff that needs to improve as a shooter, but all the physical tools are there defensively. Needs to get a little bit bigger, needs to get a little bit stronger, but I think as some pieces that get pushed out in Washington, I think Kyle Kuzma's going to get moved. We already saw Denny Avdija get moved. I think Bilal's going to be really, really good. Maybe not like all-star level good, but a really, really solid, above average starter with some upside for more than that, depending on how the shooting develops for him in Washington. At 8 and 9 now, we get to some kind of, high upside front court guys. We've got Jarace Walker and Taylor Hendricks in Indiana and Utah, respectively. Jarace Walker's interesting because they traded for Pascal Siakam, and he's, obviously a 4, so his long-term future is certainly in question there, but looked really good in Summer League. Like, he was doing some playmaking stuff, and for a team in Indiana that had a really successful season, you kind of just forgot that not only Jarris Walker's on the team, but also Benedict Mathurin. Like, they're making all these strides as a team without two of what you would think would be of their, better young players, or certainly more high upside young players. Interested to see what Jarris Walker continues to develop into. Same thing with Taylor Hendricks in Utah. He just didn't really show a ton, even for a team in Utah that, was really asking for someone to step up there in the front court. We'll see how he develops potentially as a shooter, as a switchable, positional defender, potentially now with someone like Lauri Markkanen being traded. 10, Cason Wallace, one of my favorite rookies from the class. They might end up regretting this choice in the long term. There's a trade here between them and Dallas, where Dallas moves back, gets Dereck Lively. OKC moved up, got Cason Wallace, but he was a rotation player for them, and as a rookie, that is impressive. Obviously now with Caruso there, Lu Dort, maybe some of the minutes aren't quite there for him this upcoming season, but OKC is going to keep doing this. They've got their stars. They've got Jalen Williams, SGA, Chet, and they've got an opportunity to bring in more star power if they want. I'd anticipate they're going to keep using their draft picks this way, where maybe Cason Wallace is eventually the Lu Dort replacement as this, stronger defensive guard that is a bit of an inconsistent shooter. They're going to keep adding pieces like this, and I'm excited to see what Cason Wallace looks like in OKC moving forward. Jett Howard at 11, I already talked about earlier, someone that was a surprise to be picked there. People thought it was a bit of a reach. I liked what I saw out of him in Summer League, and again, Orlando needs floor spacing, and he could certainly be that guy. I could see him as like a Cam Johnson kind of piece long term, where everybody was surprised at how high they were selected. Cam Johnson went 10th, Jett Howard went 11th, but ultimately could be a really nice floor spacing option for an Orlando team that, again, I think is going to be really good over the next couple of seasons. 12 is a huge one. Dereck Lively was a bit of I don't want to say like a mystery player in this draft, but there was a lot of opinions on him. Some people thought he wasn't even, a lottery talent. Other people thought he was much better than that. It was clear the athleticism was there, but was he going to do the stuff you wanted him to at the NBA level, or was he going to look to be more of like this, first offensive option kind of big man? Just wasn't going to work out for him at the NBA level. He was the best big man on the team last year for Dallas as a rookie. That included, Daniel Gafford. They obviously brought in other guys like PJ Washington, but in terms of guys they played at the 5, Dereck Lively was one of their best players and looks to continue to improve as someone that can maybe even be a little bit of a playmaker for them out of a short role. He showed glimpses of that. Defensively, he was really good. Rebounding, he was really good. Perfect for Dallas. And if they end up winning a title or making the finals again over the next couple of seasons, it's going to have a lot to do with a really good selection here at 12 in Dereck Lively. And keep in mind, the only reason they had the 10th pick in this draft, again, they traded back from 10 to 12. They dumped some contracts to do so. They only had that pick because they tanked the last couple of games in the year to give themselves the best chance of getting into the top 10 and not giving up their pick to the Knicks. That was a top 10 protected pick. They landed in the top 10, moved back to 12 to pick Lively. The only reason they have Dereck Lively in the roster is because they tanked the last 2 games of the year. So keep that one in mind as well moving forward. Now we start to go a little bit quicker here. 14, Jordan Hawkins, I think is going to be good. I don't think he's going to be an all-star or anything, but with an uncertain wing rotation there in New Orleans, Brandon Ingram up in the air, the other wings that they have, moving out Dyson Daniels, bringing in DeJounte Murray. For a team that at times struggles to find floor spacing, Jordan Hawkins could be the best shooter on the team. Like, Trey Murphy is a really, really good shooter, so that's a high bar to clear, but even though he's skinny, not the best defender, I think Jordan Hawkins is going to have a role moving forward as a specialist shooter in New Orleans. 16, Keontae George in Utah, another, top 16 pick here for the Jazz. I'm interested in him. I'm not as high on him as some other people are. I could see him being like a taller Jordan Clarkson kind of guy for the rest of his career, where like spark plug offensive option, you like having those guys on your team, but I don't necessarily see future star when I watch Keontae George. 18, Jaime Jaquez, one of the best picks of the draft, certainly one of the best in the top 20 in terms of value. Played a ton for Miami, was immediately awesome. Obviously is an older guy, but is going to be someone that is just going to average, between 12 to 16 points per game for the next handful of years, and is going to be good and productive in Miami as he continues to improve. Another great value selection. This is kind of where this class could separate itself historically, not just at the top, but with the depth of the class and some second round guys we're going to talk about as well. Brandon Podziemski at 19, who is arguably a franchise cornerstone now for the Warriors moving forward. It's him or Kuminga, obviously, with some Lauri Markkanen possible trade talks. They love this guy. They love his competitiveness, his rebounding, his playmaking, his scoring, his shooting. Just makes winning plays, and is someone that is going to be really, really good for Golden State. Obviously, the ceiling is a little bit capped because of his size. He's not going to be an all-star or anything, but a really good player. Golden State, great value at 19. 20, this was arguably the story of the draft when the first round was over. Cam Whitmore goes 20 to Houston. There were rumors that Houston might take him at 4, or other teams might take him in the top 10. He fell all the way to 20 for reasons that still kind of remain unclear. There was some injury stuff, some attitude stuff, but to fall all the way to 20 felt weird. And that ended up being the case. I don't know if Cam Whitmore is going to end up being a super critical piece for Houston or another team moving forward. Sometimes these guys just fall off injury-wise or whatever. But from a talent perspective, there is zero reason why he should have gone 20th and is another foundational piece for Houston moving forward, or possibly as a trade piece if they look to add a star. After we get outside of the top 20 in the first round, there's not a whole lot to talk about, but there's 4 second-round guys that I really want to talk about. 36 is Andre Jackson Jr. I'm still a fan of him, even though I don't know if Doc Rivers is going to play him a ton. Defense, if he can figure out how to shoot, going to be a really good player, potentially with some upside there for Milwaukee. One of my favorite players in class 45, GG Jackson. I've made, full-length videos about him on other channels. He might have one of the highest upsides of any player in the class. He's still so young. He was the youngest player in the class at the time, and actually played a ton for Memphis last year because of all their injuries, scored a ton. If he can shoot, guard, and rebound, he's going to play a lot for a Memphis team that I think is going to be really good this year and moving forward. 52, Toumani Camara, who initially was with Phoenix and then ended up moving to Portland as part of the kind of Damian Lillard, DeAndre Ayton, all those pieces, Yusuf Nurkic moving around. He can really guard. If he can figure out how to shoot, he's going to be an NBA pro for a long time. And then 57, Trace Jackson Davis, really good for Golden State as well. Undersized as a big, I could see him kind of going the Jordan Bell route, where it's like, hey, Golden State's really excited about this guy they picked in the second round, and then 2 years later, he's like not relevant at all, but a really good rookie season for him. And the fact that it took me this long to get through all the picks that I find interesting in this class tells you just how special the 2023 NBA draft class could be. It's only been a year, but as we look back on this class again 4 or 5 years from now, it could end up being an awesome, potentially all-time class.